A rain-soaked woman collapses at a corporate gala, clutching her pregnant belly, as a powerful CEO rushes to help her, completely unaware that the child inside her is his own. This is the story of Rebecca Mitchell, a woman whose one night of passion would collide with her desperate need for survival in the most unexpected way. What happens when the father of your unborn child becomes your employer without knowing the truth? Stay with me, because what unfolds will leave you speechless. It was November 1982 in Chicago, and Rebecca Mitchell was 8 months pregnant, standing in the cold rain outside the Grand Meridian Hotel. Her worn coat barely covered her swollen belly as she watched limousines pull up to the entrance, depositing elegantly dressed guests for the annual Harrison Corporation charity gala. She wasn't supposed to be there. 6 months ago, she had been fired from her waitressing job at a downtown diner when her pregnancy began to show. The manager said customers didn't want to see a pregnant woman serving their food. Since then, Rebecca had been surviving on odd jobs, cleaning houses, anything she could find. But Chicago winters were brutal, and her savings were gone. She had come to the hotel that night because she heard they needed extra servers for the gala. It was her last chance. The employment agency had turned her away earlier that day. One look at her condition, and they said no restaurant would hire her. But Rebecca was desperate. She had no family, no support, and a baby coming in less than a month. The father? He didn't even know she existed anymore. Rebecca took a deep breath and walked through the service entrance. The kitchen was chaos. Staff running everywhere, preparing elaborate dishes for 400 guests. She found the catering manager, a thin woman named Dorothy with sharp eyes and a clipboard. Rebecca lied smoothly, said she had experience, said she could work the entire night. Dorothy looked at her belly, hesitated, then nodded. They were short-staffed and desperate. She handed Rebecca a uniform and told her to stay in the back, just refilling drinks and clearing plates. Nothing that would draw attention. For the first 2 hours, Rebecca moved through the shadows of the ballroom, her body aching with every step. The baby pressed against her ribs, making it hard to breathe. She watched wealthy men in tuxedos and women dripping in diamonds, laughing and drinking champagne that cost more than her monthly rent used to be. And then she saw him, Jonathan Harrison, the CEO of Harrison Corporation, the man hosting this entire event, the man whose company employed thousands across the Midwest. He stood near the stage, tall and commanding in his tailored tuxedo, his dark hair touched with grey at the temples, his presence drawing every eye in the room. Rebecca's hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped the tray she was holding. Jonathan Harrison, the father of her child. The man she had met 9 months ago at a different hotel, a corporate conference where she had been working a temporary catering job. He had been kind to her that night, asked her name, talked to her like she mattered. One conversation had led to drinks after her shift ended. Drinks had led to his hotel room. It had been one night, just one perfect night where Rebecca had felt seen and wanted and beautiful. He had left early the next morning for a flight to New York, kissed her forehead, told her he'd call. He never did. When Rebecca discovered she was pregnant 6 weeks later, she tried to reach him. She called Harrison Corporation, but his assistant said Mr. Harrison was traveling internationally and couldn't be disturbed. She wrote letters to the company address. They were never answered. She even went to the corporate headquarters once, but security wouldn't let her pass the lobby without an appointment. Eventually, Rebecca understood the truth. She had been nothing to him, a moment of distraction, a forgettable encounter. So she stopped trying and prepared to raise this baby alone. Now here he was, 15 feet away, completely unaware that the exhausted server in the ill-fitting uniform was carrying his child. Rebecca forced herself to keep working, to stay invisible. But fate had other plans. As she bent to pick up empty glasses from a table, a sharp pain shot through her abdomen. She gasped, steadying herself against a chair. Not now, she thought desperately, not here. But the pain came again, stronger this time, and she felt wetness between her legs. Her water had broken. Panic flooded through her. She was 8 months pregnant. It was too early, and she was standing in the middle of a gala with nowhere to go. Rebecca tried to walk toward the service exit, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The room started spinning. She reached for a nearby column to steady herself, but her hand missed, and she stumbled forward. The last thing she heard before everything went black was someone shouting for help and strong hands catching her before she hit the marble floor. When Rebecca opened her eyes, she was lying on a leather couch in an office. The pain in her belly had subsided to a dull ache. A man was kneeling beside her, his face creased with concern. Jonathan Harrison. Her vision cleared and she saw him properly, saw the worry in his dark eyes, and her heart broke all over again. He didn't recognize her. 9 months ago, she had been different. Her hair longer, her face not hollowed by stress and hunger. She had been smiling and confident that night. Now she was just another struggling woman in trouble. "Someone call an ambulance," Jonathan said, his voice sharp with authority. A woman in a black dress appeared with a phone. Jonathan kept his hand on Rebecca's shoulder, telling her to stay calm, that help was coming, that she would be okay. Rebecca wanted to tell him the truth right then. She wanted to scream that this baby was his, that she had tried to find him, that she hadn't wanted to be invisible. But fear kept her silent. What if he didn't believe her? What if he thought she was lying to trap him? What if he had security throw her out? The paramedics arrived within minutes. As they lifted Rebecca onto a stretcher, Jonathan walked alongside them, asking questions, demanding they take her to Northwestern Memorial, the best hospital in Chicago, saying he would cover all costs. Rebecca stared at him in shock. Why was he doing this? He didn't know her. But Jonathan Harrison had a reputation for philanthropy, for taking care of his employees and even strangers in need. This was just his nature. It had nothing to do with her specifically. At the hospital, doctors confirmed Rebecca was in early labor. The baby was coming whether she was ready or not. They moved her to a delivery room and asked about the father, about family, about anyone they should call. Rebecca said there was no one. She was alone. A nurse squeezed her hand and told her she was brave. But Rebecca didn't feel brave. She felt terrified. Hours passed in a blur of pain and exhaustion. Rebecca lost track of time, lost track of everything except the overwhelming need to push, to bring this baby into the world. And then finally, at 4:17 in the morning on November 14th, she heard a cry. Her son. The nurse placed him on her chest, a tiny, perfect boy with dark hair and the same strong features she had memorized from his father's face. Rebecca wept as she held him, overwhelmed with love and grief and uncertainty about how she would survive. The next morning, a social worker came to her room. There were questions about Rebecca's living situation, her employment, her support system. Rebecca answered honestly because she was too exhausted to lie. She had no home. She had been staying in a women's shelter, but they only allowed 30-day stays, and her time was up. She had no job and no prospects. The social worker's face grew more concerned with each answer. She mentioned foster care, temporary placement until Rebecca could get on her feet. Rebecca felt her world shattering. They wanted to take her baby. That afternoon, Rebecca was signing paperwork with shaking hands when there was a knock on her hospital room door. Jonathan Harrison walked in, still wearing his tuxedo from the night before, looking like he hadn't slept. Rebecca's heart stopped. He approached her bed slowly, his expression serious. "Miss Mitchell," he said, and Rebecca realized he had asked the hospital for her name. "I want to help you. I've spoken with the hospital administrator and settled your medical bills. But I'd like to do more if you'll allow me." Rebecca couldn't speak. Jonathan continued, explaining that Harrison Corporation had a program for employees in crisis situations, temporary housing assistance and job placement. If she was willing, he could arrange an entry-level position in the company mailroom, something she could do while recovering. The position came with a small apartment in a company-owned building, subsidized rent until she was back on her feet. It wasn't charity, he emphasized. She would be a real employee, expected to work and earn her place. But it was a chance, a real chance. "Why are you doing this?" Rebecca finally managed to ask. Jonathan smiled slightly. "Last night when you collapsed, you were wearing a name tag from the catering company. I made some calls this morning and learned you weren't actually on their regular staff. You showed up desperate for work while 8 months pregnant. That takes courage. My mother raised me alone after my father died. I know what that struggle looks like. If I can help someone avoid that hardship, I will." Rebecca wanted to tell him then. The words were right there. "This baby is yours. You're his father." But fear paralyzed her again. Jonathan Harrison was offering her a lifeline, a job and a home, based on compassion and his own childhood experiences. What would happen if she revealed the truth? Would he think she had orchestrated everything, gotten pregnant on purpose to trap him? Would he take back his offer? Would he try to take her son away? Rebecca had nothing. No money, no family, no legal standing to fight a billionaire if he decided he wanted custody. So she made a choice. She thanked him quietly and accepted his offer, and she kept her secret locked inside her heart. The apartment Harrison Corporation provided was small but clean, a one-bedroom in a building near the Chicago River. Rebecca started in the mailroom 2 weeks after giving birth, her son David in a company daycare center that charged based on income. Her co-workers were kind, older women who brought her casseroles and hand-me-down baby clothes. Rebecca worked hard, never late, never complaining, determined to prove she deserved the chance Jonathan Harrison had given her. Months passed, and Rebecca settled into her new life. She rarely saw Jonathan. He worked on the executive floor 15 stories above the mailroom, but sometimes she would catch glimpses of him in the lobby or cafeteria. Each time, her heart ached with the weight of her secret. David was growing beautifully, a happy baby with Jonathan's dark eyes and strong jaw. The resemblance would only become more obvious as he got older. Rebecca knew she couldn't hide forever, but she didn't know how to tell the truth now. Too much time had passed. The lie of omission had grown too large. It was April 1983 when everything changed. Rebecca was delivering mail to the executive floor, something she rarely did, but the usual courier was sick. She pushed her cart through the elegant corridors, past offices with mahogany furniture and original artwork. As she approached Jonathan's office, she heard raised voices. His door was slightly open. Rebecca knew she should walk past, but she heard Jonathan say something that made her freeze. He was talking about his ex-wife, about how she had left him 2 years ago because he wanted children and she didn't. He sounded heartbroken. "I would have been a good father," Jonathan said quietly to whoever was in his office with him. "I would have loved that child more than anything." Rebecca stood in the hallway, her hands gripping the mail cart, tears streaming down her face. Jonathan Harrison wanted to be a father. He had wanted children desperately enough that his marriage had ended over it, and she had kept his son from him for 5 months, not out of malice but out of fear. Fear that he wouldn't believe her, fear that he would reject them, fear that he would take David away. But standing there listening to the raw pain in his voice, Rebecca realized she had made a terrible mistake. Jonathan deserved to know his son. David deserved to know his father, and she had to find the courage to tell the truth, no matter what happened next. That evening, Rebecca requested a meeting with Jonathan through his assistant, saying she had an important personal matter to discuss. His assistant looked surprised, but scheduled her for the following afternoon. Rebecca barely slept that night. She rehearsed what she would say 100 different ways, but nothing sounded right. How do you tell someone they have a 5-month-old son? How do you explain why you kept silent? The next day, Rebecca dressed in her best clothes, a simple dress she had bought from a thrift store, and left David with a neighbor. She took the elevator to the executive floor, her heart pounding so hard she thought she might pass out. Jonathan's assistant led her into his office, a massive room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Jonathan stood from behind his desk, smiling warmly. "Miss Mitchell, please sit down. What can I do for you?" Rebecca sat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. For a long moment she couldn't speak. Jonathan waited patiently, his expression open and kind. Finally, Rebecca took a deep breath and began. "Mr. Harrison, we've met before. Before the night I collapsed at your gala. 9 months before that night, actually." Jonathan's expression shifted to confusion. He studied her face carefully. "I'm sorry, I don't remember. Where did we meet?" "The conference at the Palmer House Hotel," Rebecca said quietly. "March of last year. You were the keynote speaker for a business leadership summit. I was working the catering for the evening reception. We talked after your speech. You asked me about my dreams, my plans. You said I seemed too smart to be serving drinks forever." Recognition slowly dawned in Jonathan's eyes. His face went pale. "Rebecca," he whispered, "you had longer hair. You were—" He stopped, clearly struggling to reconcile the confident young woman he remembered with the exhausted person who had collapsed at his gala. "I tried to contact you," Rebecca said, her voice shaking now. "After that night we spent together, after I found out I was pregnant. I called your office dozens of times. I wrote letters. I came to the building, but security wouldn't let me through. I wasn't trying to trap you or get money from you. I just thought you should know. But you never responded, and eventually I gave up." The color had completely drained from Jonathan's face. "Pregnant?" he said hoarsely. "You were pregnant? Are you saying?" Rebecca stood up and pulled a photograph from her purse. She placed it on his desk. Jonathan picked it up with trembling hands. It was a picture of David, taken just last week, his dark eyes bright and curious, his smile showing 2 tiny teeth. The resemblance to Jonathan was unmistakable. "His name is David," Rebecca said through her tears. "He's 5 months old. He's healthy and happy and perfect. And he's your son. I should have told you that night at the hospital, but I was terrified. You were being so kind, offering me a job and a home, and I thought if I told you the truth you might think I had planned everything, that I was trying to manipulate you. I thought you might take him away from me. But I heard you yesterday talking about wanting children, and I realized I had no right to keep this from you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Jonathan stared at the photograph for what felt like an eternity. Then he looked up at Rebecca, and she saw tears running down his face. "I have a son," he said, his voice breaking. "This whole time I've had a son?" Rebecca nodded, unable to speak. Jonathan stood abruptly and walked to the windows, his back to her, his shoulders shaking. Rebecca waited, terrified, certain he would call security, call lawyers, call someone to take David away. Instead, Jonathan turned back to her and said, "I want to meet him. Please, can I meet my son? If you're watching this and wondering what you would do in Rebecca's situation, tell me in the comments. Would you have told the truth from the beginning, or would fear have kept you silent too? And if this story has touched your heart, if you want to see how Jonathan and David's relationship unfolds, hit that subscribe button right now, because the next chapter of this journey will blow your mind. The meeting happened 2 days later at Rebecca's apartment. Jonathan arrived carrying bags from a toy store, so many bags that he had to make 2 trips from his car. Rebecca opened the door, holding David, who looked at this stranger with curious eyes. Jonathan froze when he saw them together. He was so small, Jonathan breathed. So perfect. Rebecca invited him in, and they sat on her worn couch. She placed David in Jonathan's arms and watched as this powerful CEO, this man who commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions without hesitation, completely fell apart, holding his son for the first time. David grabbed Jonathan's finger and held on tight, and Jonathan wept openly. "I'm your father," he whispered to David. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there when you were born. I'm so sorry." The next weeks were complicated. Jonathan wanted to be involved in David's life immediately, wanted to make up for lost time. He visited every evening after work, learning how to change diapers and prepare bottles. He set up a trust fund for David's future, arranged for better health insurance, better everything. But he never once made Rebecca feel like he was trying to replace her or push her aside. Instead, he asked her permission for everything, respected her role as David's mother, acknowledged that she had been there from the beginning while he had not. They had difficult conversations about why Rebecca's calls and letters had never reached him. Jonathan investigated and discovered that his assistant at the time, a woman named Patricia, who had been with the company for years, had screened all his communications obsessively. She had viewed Rebecca as a gold digger trying to trap her boss, and had destroyed the letters, blocked the calls, turned Rebecca away from the building. Patricia had been protecting Jonathan's interests as she saw them, but in doing so, she had kept a father from his child. Jonathan fired her immediately. As spring turned to summer, Jonathan and Rebecca developed a friendship built around their love for David. They were co-parents, figuring out schedules and decisions together. Jonathan never pushed for more than Rebecca was ready to give, never demanded rights or made threats. He simply showed up day after day, proving through his actions that he was committed to being David's father. And slowly, Rebecca's fear began to fade. She saw that Jonathan's love for their son was genuine and unconditional. She saw that he had no intention of taking David away from her. Instead, he wanted to build a family together, however that might look. One August evening, after they had put David to bed in his crib, Jonathan and Rebecca sat together on her couch, drinking coffee. Jonathan turned to her and said, "I've been thinking about something, and I need to ask you directly. That night we spent together, it wasn't just physical for me. I felt a connection with you, something real. And then I left the next morning and got caught up in business emergencies overseas, and by the time I came back to Chicago weeks later, I had convinced myself that you were too young, that I had taken advantage, that you probably didn't want to hear from me again. I was a coward. But Rebecca, if I had known about David, I would have been there. I want you to know that." "I believe you," Rebecca said quietly. "And Jonathan, that night wasn't just physical for me either. I thought about you for months afterward. I hoped you would call. When you didn't, when I couldn't reach you after I found out I was pregnant, I told myself that you were just another rich man who used people and moved on. But I was wrong. You're a good man. You've proven that every single day since you learned about David." Jonathan reached for her hand. "I don't want to just be David's father who visits in the evenings and goes home. I want to be a real family, the three of us. I'm not asking you to marry me right now. That would be moving too fast after everything we've been through. But I'm asking if you would consider dating me, getting to know me again, seeing if what we felt that night 9 months ago could grow into something lasting." Rebecca looked at this man who had saved her when she had nothing, who had given her a job and a home without knowing she carried his child, who had embraced fatherhood with such complete devotion the moment he learned the truth. She thought about how he made David laugh, how he read bedtime stories with different voices for each character, how he had learned to make bottles at exactly the right temperature. She thought about how he treated her with respect and kindness, how he had never once blamed her for keeping the secret, how he had only apologized for not being there. "Yes," Rebecca said, "I would like that very much." Their relationship developed slowly and carefully over the following months. Jonathan courted Rebecca properly, taking her on real dates when his mother came to babysit David. They talked for hours about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. They learned each other in ways they hadn't had time for during that single night 9 months before, and they fell in love, deeply and genuinely, built on a foundation of shared love for their son and growing respect for each other. In December 1983, on David's first birthday, Jonathan proposed to Rebecca in their apartment with David sitting between them playing with wrapping paper. He offered her a ring and a promise. He said he wanted to spend the rest of his life making up for the months he had missed, being the father David deserved and the husband Rebecca deserved. He said he wanted more children eventually if she did, siblings for David, a house full of noise and laughter. He said she had changed his entire world by walking back into his life and trusting him with the truth. Rebecca said yes through happy tears. They were married 3 months later in a small ceremony with just close friends and family. Jonathan's mother, who had flown in from Arizona, held David during the vows and wept with joy. She told Rebecca afterward that she had prayed for years that her son would find someone genuine, someone who loved him for who he was and not what he had. "You gave him a son and a second chance at love," she said. "You gave him everything." The years that followed were not always easy. Building a life together required work and compromise and patience. Rebecca had to adjust to being married to a CEO, to the public attention and social obligations that came with Jonathan's position. Jonathan had to learn to balance his demanding career with being present for his family. But they were committed to making it work, and they did. David grew into a bright, curious boy who loved baseball and science and making his parents laugh. He had 2 younger sisters by the time he was 5. And the 3 children filled the Harrison household with constant energy and joy. Rebecca went back to school and earned a business degree, eventually working in Harrison Corporation's Human Resources Department, where she created programs to help employees facing hardships similar to what she had endured. Jonathan scaled back his international travel and made family dinners a non-negotiable priority. They never forgot where they had started. Every November 14th, on David's birthday, Jonathan and Rebecca would talk with their children about the importance of second chances and telling the truth, even when it's terrifying. They talked about how fear can make us hide important things, but courage allows us to be vulnerable and authentic. They talked about how family isn't always built in traditional ways, but love is what makes it real. That rain-soaked night in November 1982, when a desperate pregnant woman collapsed at a corporate gala, changed multiple lives forever. It brought a father and son together who should never have been apart. It created a love story between 2 people who had been searching for connection and purpose. It proved that sometimes the most unexpected moments lead to the most beautiful outcomes. Rebecca Mitchell had walked into that hotel with nothing but desperation and courage. She walked out with everything she had ever wanted, a family, a future, a love that would last a lifetime. And it all started because she finally found the strength to tell Jonathan Harrison the truth he deserved to know, that the child he had longed for had been right there all along, waiting for him to come home.